astronomers were looking at various stars and things, and also other objects, including something called the Andromeda Nebula, as they called it. It was kind of a faint, fuzzy object. And it had been discovered that certain types of stars had a certain size, and so Hubble took some photographs of this Andromeda Nebula and discovered that there were these types of stars there, and he was able to deduce that this meant that the Andromeda Nebula was roughly 1,000,000 light years away from Earth, which basically put it well outside what we know today to be the Milky Way. So it meant that the universe is much larger than the galaxy we're in, and I won't get into that in great detail, but of course, our galaxy, as big as it is almost a fly speck compared to the rest of the universe. So when they named Hubble, they knew that there would be similar discoveries being made about kind of the dimensions of the universe. They wanted to find out how big the universe is, how old it is, things like that. So, and in the 1920s as well, people started talking about, doing astronomy from space, perhaps putting a telescope on the moon or putting it in space somewhere. But it wasn't until 1946 that the first kind of serious, detailed plan was made for a space telescope, and it was by this fellow at the left, Lyman Spitzer, who spent most of his career at the Princeton Observatory. He's kind of seen as kind of the father of of Hubble and just space telescopes in general. Hubble also has a mother, and this is this woman at the right, Nancy Grace Roman. When she got into astronomy in the 50s and 60s, there weren't many opportunities for women, no matter how smart they were, well trained, or anything like that. So the job of chief astronomer for NASA was not a coveted one. So she got it. And while she was there, she championed what became Hubble. Incidentally, both of these people have space telescopes named after them. I'll mention the Spitzer one in a little while, and the Nancy Grace Roman telescope is actually being built right now and will be the successor to James Webb, although it'll be quite different in a lot of ways from James Webb, and I don't really have time to get into that, but you will hear her name again in the future. So anyway, 1946, Spitzer started talking about something like Hubble and wrote a detailed paper about it. Once the space age got going, the United States and actually Europe and various other countries started launching small space telescopes with limited capability. I would say the first one that really got going was the Second Orbiting Astronomical Observatory, which was actually launched in late 1968. But let's just turn for a minute. Why a space telescope? Of course, one thing is to get a telescope that's above our atmosphere, with all its turbulence and everything else. Looking up at the universe from the surface of the Earth is a little bit like when you go swimming and you stick your head underwater and then look up, and everything is kind of. But there's another reason as well, and that's because our atmosphere protects humans and other forms of life from various types of light and energy, which could do great harm to us. But of course, it means that what astronomers can see from the Earth is very limited. You can see here the area of visible light that we know and love is very narrow, but light also goes into the infrared and then eventually into microwave and radio, which we do have access to, or going the other way into ultraviolet light and X-rays and gamma rays and things like that. Astronomers want to see and record light in all these wavelengths because they all tell us something about the stars or whatever it is we happen to be looking at. So that's the big reason for space telescopes. Now, Hubble can only see kind of a limited part of all its real estate. It can see in the visible, sort of in the near ultraviolet here, and the near infrared, just kind of limited. And Hubble was part of what we call the great observatories, at least the first generation of them. In the 90s and the early part of this century, NASA also launched, besides Hubble, it launched the Chandra X-ray Observatory, which is still going, the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory, which is no longer operating, and then a near-infrared telescope, which is named after Lyman Spitzer, which actually just closed down a couple of years ago. And then, of course, we have radio telescopes, which look in those wavelengths and things like that. Now there's talk of a new generation of great observatories, but that's a discussion for another day. And these here's the great observatories I just mentioned, but certainly the best known of them is the Hubble Space Telescope. So NASA and the administration and Congress basically approved building Hubble in 1977 and set to work on building it. And this is what Hubble looks like. It's roughly the size of a school bus, and it has its main mirror here. The light comes in, bounces off of this mirror. I think it's 94 inches or something in diameter, and then it goes off a smaller mirror here, down through here, and then there's a set of different instruments here, and also the fine guidance sensors behind the main mirror. It's powered by solar panels. Hubble does not use thrusters to aim itself. It uses momentum wheels and gyroscopes. So it kind of turns very slowly. And through its lifetime, when it was visited by the space shuttle, its orbit would be boosted up. But it is different. For example, the James Webb Space Telescope does use thrusters, but we'll get into Webb a little later on. So, as I mentioned before, Hubble has always been designed to be refurbished and updated by the space shuttle and have its instruments replaced. So this is a list of the various instruments that have been on board Hubble and when they were on Hubble. this picture at the upper side here, this actually shows the one of Hubble's main cameras. The cameras and the fine guidance sensors kind of look like this. They kind of look like baby grand pianos. And then the other instruments, which are behind where the camera is, they look like phone booths. Anyway, you can see that these instruments have been changed out over the years. So the Hubble Space Telescope today is actually quite different and much more powerful than Hubble as it was when it was launched in 1990, because the instruments are more powerful. They have newer chips or newer electronics and things like that. And then, of course, when we get into something like the JWST, its instruments are even more powerful than the Hubble instruments. So we have, I guess, a couple of different classes of instruments on Hubble. Of course, we have the cameras that we all know and love, but spectroscopy is actually a lot of the bread and butter work of Hubble. That is, you not only just get an image of the object, you split up the light into its component parts, and that's basically like taking the fingerprints of that object. It can tell you a great deal about the what the object is made of, its chemical composition, its motion, various things. It might not be very exciting for the general public, but it's the bread and butter of astronomy. And then there's a couple of other specialized instruments that also flew on Hubble. So Hubble, and this is true of any space telescope, is just not sort of a satellite that's up there and you turn on your radio set. There's a lot of infrastructure back here on Earth. Information goes up and comes back down from Hubble through the TDRS satellites, which are used for the ISS and the shuttle and all sorts of spacecraft that are in Earth orbit now. I think most of us are quite familiar with TDRS, and the control center for Hubble is at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, which is not the best known of NASA centers, but is very important. There's a lot of important spacecraft that are run out of there, including astronomical spacecraft like Hubble and other space telescopes, and also the spacecraft that are looking at the Earth and dealing with issues such as climate change. Now, while Hubble was being built, NASA acceded to the demands of its astronomers and actually asked to have a special institute built for the scientists working on Hubble. And so it's the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is located at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. It's less than an hour's drive away from Goddard, depending on the traffic conditions you get on the Parkway in Washington there. The scientific work of Hubble is sort of coordinated through the Space Telescope Institute, but scientists from all over the world ask for and are given time on Hubble for their research, and it's all coordinated through STSCI. And I might add that that the Institute also contains an archive of all the data that Hubble has sent down, and actually a lot of astronomers today, they don't necessarily say, oh, well, I would like to look at this or that or the other thing. They check and see if it's in the archive, and quite often it is. There's also an archive in Europe, because an important thing to mention with Hubble is that the European Space Agency is actually a partner in the Hubble program. And then I'll put on my Canadian hat. There's also an archive up here in Canada at the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory, about maybe 10 miles away from where I'm sitting on Vancouver Island. There's a bit of a story to that, and I don't have time to tell that story today. But anyway, these are all important, and it's interesting to note one difference between Hubble and Webb is that the control center for Webb is actually at the Space Telescope Institute. A lot of the work of building Webb took place at Goddard, but now it's all controlled out of the STSCI. So the story of the creation of Hubble, even before it left the launch pad, is quite long and involved, and you could say that for Webb too. But a major thing that should be mentioned is that it was due to be launched in 1986, and of course it was delayed for nearly 4 years after the loss of the Space Shuttle Challenger in January 1986. And we all know about the sacrifices that the crew made and all that. And I think it's important to mention that even though it was, on the face of it, maybe a bad thing that Hubble was held off for 4 years, it actually turned out to be a very fortunate thing, because Hubble had a lot of problems, as I'm going to state in a minute, when it was launched in 1990. But it would have actually had a lot more problems had they have gone ahead and launched it in 1986. For example, the solar panels that powered it proved to be troublesome. But probably if they'd have used the solar panels they had wanted to in 1986, Hubble might have just completely failed. It might have been just a complete wash. And there were some other things that weren't quite ready in 1986. So that's kind of an interesting story. But they had found from some work with spacecraft deployed by early shuttle flights that they should rethink the design of the solar panels, which they did. But even so, they still had a lot of problems with them once Hubble was launched. But anyway, in 1990, Hubble was finally launched on the STS 30 mission, and the deployment went reasonably well, except they did have trouble unfurling the solar panels, but they finally did have a workaround. There was a couple of astronauts, Kathy Sullivan and Bruce McCandless, were on this mission, who actually were just minutes away from going outside the airlock and deploying the panels manually, and the mission control found a workaround for that. So it was launched on April 24th and deployed the next day. So a spacecraft as large as Hubble, as I said, it was as big as a school bus, very complicated. They knew it would have kind of a lengthy commissioning period. Well, First of all, they started noticing that the solar panels shook quite a bit when it passed between daylight and in the dark part of the orbit. And then there was a number of other teething problems. But finally, about a month after it was deployed, they started to take pictures. And with the main camera, the wide field planetary camera, and they discovered that the pictures were not focused. They tried with some other instruments; they were not focused. So this telescope, which cost more than $1 billion in the money of 30 years ago, they discovered. And it took them some time to wrap their minds around this problem, but that this mirror, which was supposed to be a triumph of technology, ground with computerized instruments, had been precisely ground to the wrong shape. It was out by about 40 microns, less than the width of a human hair, but it meant that the images could not be properly focused. It was called spherical aberration, and so once they figured out that this was the case, and it just blew their minds. They had a press conference and announced this, and as you can see, the cartoonists had fun with it. The late night comedians had fun with it. It became a byword for failure. Another big rap against NASA, which was going through some hard times then, in part because of various problems with the shuttle and other spacecraft. And you can even come across movies from the time. If you ever watch Naked Gun 2.5, you will see a scene where the main character is drowning his sorrows in this bar where all the decorations are massive failures like the Hindenburg and the Edsel, and then there's the Hubble telescope. And this was a terrible time for people who had worked on it because they couldn't kind of escape the notoriety of this embarrassing failure. And this went on all throughout the summer of 1990, although the headlines kind of moved away later that summer when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and kicked off the first Gulf War. But the people at NASA knew that they were in big trouble because they had the means, and actually even before they announced the problem publicly, some of the leaders of NASA realized that there was a way to get around it, and it was due to the fact that Hubble could be, was due to be visited by the space shuttle to update instruments and replace instruments. So in December of 1993, nearly 30 years ago now, the first shuttle servicing mission went off to Hubble. Now, it had a lot of work to do because actually, first of all, it replaced the solar panels with ones that didn't shake as much, which increased the efficiency of Hubble. But it actually brought up a new camera and an instrument called CoStar. And so what the camera did is it was actually kind of fit with some extra mirrors, which acted as in the same way as, say, eyeglasses or contact lenses for the instrument. So it meant that the camera could take clear images the way it had originally been designed to do. And CoStar was actually kind of a set of contact lenses for the other instruments. And over time, actually all the instruments were replaced. They didn't need CoStar anymore because all the instruments were kind of adapted to deal with the mistake that had been made in the mirror. It's quite a story, and that's a couple of chapters, big chapters of my book, how they did that. But what happened is a few weeks after the servicing mission returned home, they started taking pictures again, and as you can see, they were much better. And within months, Hubble became a byword of American success, and people started to forget that this awful, terrible thing had happened to it, and they had managed to overcome it. Over time, there have been 5 servicing missions to Hubble. Each one of them was kind of different, and it involved a great deal of training and preparation on the part of the astronauts who flew those missions. In the astronaut corps, there was kind of a feeling that if you were assigned to a Hubble mission, you were kind of the top of the heap, and I can't. I'd be here 2 or 3 hours if I really got into detail about how these missions differed from one another. I mean, there was one mission where Hubble was just on the brink of conking out. They had to develop special tools and instruments to change things out that actually hadn't been planned to be changed out, like the Hubble's computer and things like that. The gyroscopes had to be changed out. The various instruments had to be changed out. And the last servicing mission to Hubble was in 2009, just a couple of years before the space shuttle program ended. So since that time, and it's what is it? We're getting into 15 or so years now since that mission. When things break down on Hubble, they break down, and we can't send astronauts up there to fix it. But that's another story. But anyway, a lot of the story of Hubble is the story of these servicing missions, and it's quite an interesting story. So I want to talk about some of the work that Hubble has done on orbit. Of course, we are all familiar with some of the amazing images it has taken. The one at the left here, for example, is Eta Carinae, which is probably most of you haven't seen it because it's only visible from the southern hemisphere. But Hubble has taken a lot of great images of this because it's a fascinating formation. And actually, one of the first pictures and one of the best pictures that's come out of Webb so far is Eta Carinae, and of course, lots of galaxies and things like that. And perhaps the most famous picture from Hubble was the so-called pillars of creation. And the first one came out about a year or two after Hubble was fixed. And then it's taken a couple of others in varying wavelengths that we see here. And also Webb has taken some pretty good pictures of this. This is the Eagle Nebula, which is familiar to astronomers. And this is an area where stars are being born, where they're being created up here. And there's sort of winds, shall we say, winds of radiation blowing away the gas off of these areas where stars are being formed. Hubble has been involved in many discoveries, often in tandem with other space telescopes and instruments on Earth. And this is important to emphasize because a lot of this stuff did not happen because of Hubble exclusively, but it of course plays a big role. The universe that we know today is quite different from what we thought it was in 1990 when Hubble was launched. One of my friends there, Ken Sembach, said it's kind of a bigger and more colorful place than we thought it was. When Hubble was launched, most astronomers thought, well, the universe is expanding, but the rate of expansion is slowing down. Well, to the amazement of everyone, they found out that the rate of expansion is actually picking up, which eventually means, billions of years in the future, the universe is going to be kind of darker because everything will be much farther apart from each other than it is today. Now, a discovery of that nature would have normally caused years of argument and things like that, but the data that was sent back by Hubble and also shown by other instruments was so persuasive that switch was made very quickly. Hubble and other spacecraft kind of set the age of the universe at roughly 13.8 billion years. So when we're looking, that means the Big Bang was that long ago. And when we look to the universe in its early days, that's how far away we're looking. Another important discovery, which Hubble gets most of the credit for, is that it found that most galaxies, including our own, have what we call a supermassive black hole at its center. There's plenty of black holes around, but supermassive black holes are like millions of times larger than garden variety black holes. And they are actually kind of the gravitational glue that hold our galaxies together. That was an important discovery. Now, a couple of years after Hubble was launched, astronomers using telescopes on Earth discovered the first extrasolar planets orbiting other stars. Hubble was not designed to look for those things, but once astronomers began to discover these things, and then there's been thousands discovered now thanks to specially designed telescopes like Kepler. Hubble has been able to look at them and at these individual exoplanets and determine their atmospheric composition and things like that. Hubble has also been involved in keeping track of. It's been kind of an observatory of changes in the atmosphere of the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus. And it also helped, for example, direct New Horizons to Pluto. So it's actually been very valuable for solar system astronomers. I would argue that this image here is the most important image that Hubble has taken. It was the Hubble Deep Field. And at first, the idea of the thing was very controversial. Some astronomers said, let's take a very long exposure. And I don't mean like 10 seconds. I mean, they just opened up the cameras and on the same spot for nearly a whole week. and they decided to pick out a spot. In this case, it was in what we know as the Big Dipper or Ursa Major, a very empty part of the universe. And let's take what they call the cosmic borehole and see if we find anything. And some eminent scientists said, "Oh, you're not going to find a thing. You're wasting time." Well, this is what they found. Virtually everything here that you see, except for a couple of things with 4 spikes, which are stars, everything else is a galaxy. It showed that there's even the so-called, what were thought to be empty parts of the universe are actually full of galaxies and similar things like that. By the way, while I mentioned those stars with the 4 spikes, you can always tell a Hubble picture from a Webb picture, because the Hubble pictures, when there's a star, it has 4 spikes. When the Webb takes the picture, it's 6 spikes. So but anyway, this image revolutionized, I think, our view of the universe. It incidentally was also put out just as a lot of people were getting their first telescope or home computers capable of dealing with graphics, like equipped with the Macintosh telescope computers, and also Windows computers. So this was an early star of the universe. So over time, Hubble has taken a number of deep fields, and also supplemented with data from other telescopes. This is one that looks out particularly far, and you can see an example of gravitational lensing here. These sort of crazy shaped things. The light is actually comes from behind, say, a galaxy like this one, and is bent, so you can look even farther out into space. So,
Chris, excuse me. I just if we could wrap it up just a few minutes. We want to give time
we're getting towards the end here.
Okay.
So anyway, you can see here how far out and how far back we can look, and with Hubble, and also in comparison to James Webb, which can look back even farther. And one of I think the very first image that Webb put out was kind of a deep field. The interesting thing is that the James Webb deep field only took a relatively, maybe just a few minutes or a couple of hours to take, and it was looking back as far as Hubble was. So anyway, as you might have gleaned from the previous slide, the idea of James Webb, which operates in the infrared, unlike Hubble, and far more in the infrared. Infrared light comes from light that distant objects that are moving away from us. So it can look farther back, much closer to the beginnings of the universe. So this is part of the excitement about James Webb. This is an image from James Webb, but is actually also an image from Hubble that was released last fall. So the 2 spacecraft are working in tandem. The idea was that they wanted to get at least 2 years of James Webb operations while Hubble was still around, and it looks like they could even get more than that, depending on how it all works. And so sometimes the data from both of them will be combined as we go forward. James Webb is much bigger than Hubble, and it also is quite different. It can't be serviced. It's in quite a different place from Hubble. It's like literally a million miles away from Earth, whereas Hubble operates in low Earth orbit. And that's because it operates in the infrared and must operate at very low temperatures. So to kind of wind things up, a lot of people wonder, well, why can't they bring back Hubble? Can they bring back Hubble when it stops working? Right now, the thinking is that Hubble will kind of wind up its mission in the 2030s sometime. But it could be, for example, if all the gyroscopes conk out, it may stop. Now, a law has been passed that a robot spacecraft should go to Hubble and actually deorbit it. They don't want it to just kind of fall back to Earth uncontrolled, or relatively uncontrolled, like, well, Skylab is reputed to, although I think Emily will have something to say about that. But the point, what I wanted to say, though, is that a lot of Hubble is already back on Earth. All those instruments that were replaced from the early days of Hubble are all back on Earth. Some of them you can see at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. There's a couple here. The first camera. Now, all the holes in it, they're actually those all represent places where the outside has been pinged by orbital debris or micrometeoroids, and they actually dug out bigger holes so that they could look at them. So that isn't what it looked like, but it gives you an idea of how much it had been hit. And the photo at the left is the co-star, which was used in the repair mission. So anyway, I think I will wind it up there. Hubble is still going, and it's still going strong. And I still get press releases in the mail about its discoveries. And but of course, we're into an exciting new era with Webb. Now, the last thing I'll say is that my book was produced by and for NASA, and therefore it is a free document. You can go to that link that's at the bottom of the page there and get your download your free copy if you want to read the whole story in all its detail. So I will leave it there.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I've got one question here. As an expert on Hubble, what is your favorite image and why?
Oh, my favorite image is the deep field.
The deep field, okay.
The one I showed a couple of slides back there.
It just so happens that we have a big vinyl picture of that hanging in our office, our joint office here in the house. It's one of our favorites as well. So
I think it's an important image. It's a historic image, and there's actually a great story around it because of all the argument that took place around that. And
excellent.
And one thing they did with that image was originally, or let's say you ask for time on Hubble and you do your research, Joe Astronomer, you actually have exclusive rights to that data for a year, and then it's put in the public domain. Mm-hmm. And when the director of the Space Telescope Institute ordered that image, he just ordered that as soon as we have it, as soon as it's processed, it's free to the world. So it is actually also kind of a landmark in making data free for everyone. And, there are examples of Hubble images that have been processed by amateurs. There's some who go into the data archive and bring it down and process them, sort of in the same way that a lot of the Juno images from Jupiter are processed by amateurs.
Okay, one other question, then we'll wrap it up. Has the Hubble been redeemed, or does the Webb's existence continue to hurt its reputation?
Well, I think there's a great deal of excitement around Webb, and justly so. So I think, Webb is going to occupy center stage for a while. And, and then eventually its successors, such as the Roman telescope, will have their turn in the sun. But, I think for its time, Hubble has an amazing record of, it is, as I said, the way we see the universe now is quite different from the way we saw it when Hubble was launched. No doubt, we'll be able to say that about Webb and before too long. Mm-hmm. But Hubble, I would say, is kind of the first wave of that, and it's probably going to be historians who come along long after all of us are gone. We'll have to make that judgment.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we'll wrap it up, and want to thank you again, Chris, for very engaging discussion and presentation this afternoon. So please, folks that are tuned in, stay with us. We've got another talk coming up at the hour at 2:00. So we're going to take a break, and we'll resume at 2:00 with our next presentation. Thank you very much, Chris.